Good afternoon. Welcome to Gaylord Hall. As part of our centennial, 100 years of empowering storytellers, 1913 to 2013. And whether you love or hate the BCS or whether you're just trying to get out of 90-degree heat today, we're glad to see you here. It's my pleasure to introduce an old friend of mine who has risen very high in the ranks of intercollegiate athletics. Bill is a native of Hobart, Oklahoma, and he's got a book he's written to prove it. Editor of the local newspaper there. His family has owned the paper for many years, and anyone in western Oklahoma knows the Hancocks for sure. Bill and I met when he was in the sports information office at OU. He studied under Johnny Keith and the tutelage of the famous Harold Keith, who was legendary sports information director. And Bill got the bug there for sports information, and good thing he got his degree from OU in 1972. Some people as successful as he abscond and go off to the professional world, but he had his head on straight and he got that degree. Went to the Big 8 conference in Kansas City and a variety of media relations posts, and then as an associate commissioner, and he did so well he was promoted to be the head of the men's intercollegiate basketball tournament. It was a shadow of itself then, but Bill built it into what we know as the Final Four, one of the premier sporting events in the world. He was a natural to head the BCS when it was created, and history will now show he is the founding director of the BCS and the only director of the BCS. So, and then when they moved up to another level, of course, it was the college football championship, and who else to lead that effort than the same go-to guy that they'd been relying on for 30 years, Bill Hancock. I wish I could say that his being in these positions helped the University of Oklahoma. Unfortunately, he's a guy with the highest integrity and impartiality I think I've ever met. And he has the hate mail from Sooner fans to prove it. But Nikki, his wife, is here, high school sweetheart, also from Hobart. How many years have you been married, Bill? 45. Gosh, we thought Ed Livermore was something the other day. 45 years. Congratulations. And if Bill is an outstanding professional, indeed one of the finest alumni we have ever produced in the 100 years of this program, he is an even finer individual, as any of his friends will attest. If you need Bill, he will be there, guaranteed. And it's my pleasure today to introduce the head of the BCS, soon-to-be College Championship Series, Bill Hancock.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here. I want to salute Dean Foote and the faculty and Kristen Lazalier in particular, and all the students who made this Gaylord College 100-year celebration an awesome thing for the university and also for the college. A bunch of us were talking yesterday, and when I got here in the fall of 1968, if the Gaylord College had been celebrating an anniversary, it would have been the 55th year of the Gaylord College. I don't want to say I'm old or anything, but we didn't have a celebration for the 55th year of the Gaylord College. But there's people from all over the country, graduates of this college and this university, and it always gives me a thrill as I've traveled around the country to meet a fellow Sooner. And invariably, we're all very proud to be Sooners. I know I sure am. I thought I'd tell you just a little bit about my time here at OU. in particular where I lived. I lived in a white two-story house next to the Baptist Student Union, west of the Baptist Student Union on Boyd Street. Lived in the basement. And then we moved into married student housing south of Lindsay over by the railroad tracks, Park something. I lost the name. Parkview, which I understand that's gone also. Both of those first two places that I lived are gone. Then we bought a home on Page Circle, which is right north of Brooks on the railroad tracks. And I mean, like from me to Joe back there from the railroad tracks. And we paid $7,000 for this little house. It's still there. And trains would go, and the pictures, when the train would go by, the pictures on the wall would rattle. And Nikki and I got where we didn't pay any attention to it, but people that came to visit went into a panic when the trains went by. I found a home at the J School and a place of refuge, but also a place of kindred spirits. And after, how many of you when you were freshmen were scared to death when you walked on the campus? Anybody? I know I was. I was absolutely intimidated by everybody and everything, but I got a job in the print shop at the Daily, Oklahoma Daily, and our superintendent was W.C. Vanderwerth. We all called him Van. Lots of people didn't like him. Those of us who worked for him just loved him. He was very stern. And Donna, are you here? Yes. There's a lot of stories about Van and how he didn't get along with the front shop people, but he sure made me feel part of the family. And after a year in the back shop, I got an opportunity. Mrs. Moore asked me if I would like to be a sports writer. And I thought, gosh, if I could be around Mrs. Moore, who I already loved as a back shop guy, I'd love to do it. So I went to work in the front shop as a sports writer, and they ran out of candidates to be the editor of the Daily. And so they asked me, I got to be the editor during a summer term. Maybe the greatest honor I've ever had, frankly, was being the editor of the Daily. And then I got a chance to go to the athletic department. After my junior year, there were 3 people in the sports information office. Debbie, how many now would there be in the SID or PR office at the athletic department? 10 students, and how about full-time? 7 full. Okay, well. Well, we had 3 of us and 4 students, and we loved it. And I got a chance to go to work full-time. They called me in August and said, this job is open for the full-time number 2 person. And when Glenn Stone left, and they said, would you like to have it? And I said, well, I don't have my degree. And Johnny Keith said, well, we know, but you only lack 6 hours. And I thought, NSA. Big Brother knows that I only need 6 hours to go. See, there's some controversy now about the NSA and what they know about. But the athletic department said they would pay my tuition the last 6 hours, and it was $180. And that was more money than I ever could imagine. So they picked me up for $180 and a player to be named later. And that turned out to be the fall of '71, the great '71 OU Wishbone team. And if they'd only called the clip on the punt return on Johnny Rogers, we would have won the darn ball game against Nebraska that year. And he was down. There was a whole lot of things. And blame it on the BCS. I truly don't believe that any program, I know OU has never profited as much from a loss as we did in the athletic department from that loss. And I'm not sure any other program ever in college sports profited as much from losing a game. If you remember, those who were there, who were around, our guys lost it with class, with dignity, with respect for the opponent, and Nebraska in return returned all that to us. I got to go to a reunion about 4 years ago of the '71 Nebraska and OU teams, and it was so much fun. And Barry got up and talked about each one of our kids. Coach Switzer was assistant coach at the time. Coach Fairbanks was the head coach, and Barry individually singled out all of our guys. And there were about 25 Nebraska players here, and Coach Osborne singled his guys out too as best he could. It was remarkable evening. I thought, this is such a great sign of the class of that rivalry. I got to then be the director of the Final Four after 11 years at the Big Eight, and it was the greatest, another great honor for me. They called me and said, we're looking for a director, and we've never had one before, and we'd like you to do it. And the real reason they asked me to be director of the Final Four was because I already lived in Kansas City, and they didn't have to pay moving expenses. So it all worked out. And when I was at the Final Four, I loved every bit of it. However, when people would ask me what I would like to do after being director of the Final Four, I would always say I would love to be director of the football championship, never imagining that A, there would be a football championship, or B, I would be lucky enough again to be the director of it. So I really think I'm the luckiest guy in sports, and I owe it all to, frankly, to the experience and the start that I got here. Like you, I had lots of mentors at OU. Most of them in the journalism school. I mentioned Louise Moore before, but Grace Ray, Jack Whitaker. Anybody remember Jack Whitaker? We talked about this yesterday. You remember what his nickname was, of course, Slashin' Jack Whitaker. Do you all students, do you have anybody that you call Slashin' in the faculty today? Probably not. We were in awe of Jack Whitaker, scared of him, and I loved him. But Joe Holland was another inspiration of mine. Our dean was, I think Bob Ruggles was the dean when we were there. But I had some mentors in the athletic department. Ken Ferris, the business manager. Coach Fairbanks was a mentor. John McLeod, Enos Seymour. We had some great characters back then. The assistant football coaches, we had a wonderful group. Coach Switzer, of course, Larry Lacewell, Jimmy Johnson, Warren Harper, Donnie Duncan. We had some people that went on in football. We had a guy named Wendell Mosley who coached receivers. And I was there for this. Tinker Owens, of course, was a great freshman, had a great freshman year in 1972. Well, somebody came up and was talking. Wendell Mosley was the receivers coach. And somebody came up and was talking, and he said, Tinker Owens has charisma. And Wendell, I was standing there, and Wendell was here, and somebody else was over there. And Wendell was kind of listening. And when the person said Tinker Owens has charisma, Wendell said, well, yeah, but he'll be over it by Saturday. Those were the kind of characters we had. And we were talking about the night of the streaking in 1974 in the spring, and which they closed Lindsay, and the South Oval was kind of given over to streaking. Well, we were on a baseball trip to TCU, and we drove back up I-35, and we came in on Lindsay. We were heading for the baseball dressing room, which then was right here. And I remember that somebody in the front said, oh my goodness, they're streaking. And I remember all of the baseball players dashed over to the north side of the bus to look. And I remember thinking, this bus is going to tip over. Fortunately, it didn't happen. Let me talk a little bit about the BCS and a little bit about the college football playoff. And then if there's time, I'll stay around and answer questions for as long as you'd like to. The BCS and the playoff is interesting because in many ways, but one of which is that it's not managed by the NCAA. It's managed by the conferences. And the 10 football conferences got together. Well, it actually started the BCS. This is the 16th year for the BCS. So they got together and said, we've got a problem in postseason football. Two problems. One is number 1 and number 2 teams were not guaranteed to meet in a bowl game. And the second one is there was chaos in the bowl system. Virginia was invited to a bowl game a couple of days after Halloween. They were invited to the Sugar Bowl, and they proceeded to lose 3 of their last 4 games, but they still went to the Sugar Bowl. And the commissioner said, we've got to put a stop to that. So they tried the Bowl Coalition for 3 years and a new thing called the Bowl Alliance for 3 years. Those didn't work because the Pac-10 and the Big Ten did not join. They were not a part of those. But finally, after those two, the Pac-10 and the Big Ten were persuaded to come in, and they formed the BCS. And it's been remarkably successful in its purpose, which was to match number 1 and 2 in a bowl game. In the 15 years of the BCS, of course, by our standards, 1 and 2 have met every year. But by the AP standards, 13 of the 15 years, and the AP's number 1 and 2 have met in a bowl game. And again, almost never happened before. Well, it only happened 8 times in the 56 years before the BCS was created. So it was a seismic change in postseason football. And that was really all it was intended to do, was to be a selection for the bowl system, to put some order into the selection process, and obviously to match number 1 and 2. Well, if you read the papers, you know, in addition to realizing that I am the most hated person in college football as the BCS director, but you also realize what the BCS has done for the regular season of college football. It was never intended. That part was never intended, but it's turned what was in large part a regional game into truly a national game where people in Oklahoma have to pay attention to Boise State and TCU back in the old days. And people in Alabama had to watch what was happening in the Big Ten. And likewise in the Pac-12, they had to pay attention to what happened in the SEC. College football television ratings and attendance have just gone, and rights fees, my goodness, for television have just gone up and up and up. And it's because we have chosen to put everything into the regular season. And people say to me all the time, well, Bill, you're the only sport that doesn't have a playoff. And I say, yeah, you get it. You got it. That's the good thing. And they don't get that, of course, because all those other sports have chosen to put most of their marbles into the postseason. And the sport that I grew up on, basketball, of course, everything is in March. And I love that tournament. I always will. I worked with it for 16 years. But in football, the regular season in college basketball needs some help. We see it here at OU. It needs help in attendance. It needs help in television ratings. And I think to a large extent that's because everything's gone into March. People don't start paying attention to college basketball in many ways until March gets close. And we cannot have that happen to us in college football. So we have made a conscious decision to keep everything in the regular season. Our regular season in college football means more than any other sport. There are teams that lost last week that will have to be, and lost today. Florida loses today. They're going to have to be lucky. They're going to have a whole bunch of teams lose ahead of them to get into the championship game. Now, we know that might happen. It's happened plenty of times before. But the point is, every game matters in the regular season. And the regular season football is probably the best thing we have going for us in college athletics in so many ways. We see it. We're all back here. We Sooners are back to campus. And I don't know how many of you come back only for football. I've got a lot of friends that only come back for football. It's a way to bring the community together. It's a way for all of us to be connected. And just in terms of the practical aspect of the revenue, a regular season game, I don't want to try to estimate what it might be at Oklahoma. Let me just say a school in the Big Ten that I know for a fact, a regular season football game brings in $7 million to the athletic department, which they use to pay lots of bills, scholarships for all the athletes, facilities, travel, uniforms, medical, lodging, all those things that are a part of the athletic department ledger. Most of that money comes from regular season football. And we talk about the BCS money, which is great, don't get me wrong, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to a regular season home football game. And if we start monkeying with the regular season, taking away from it in any way, we put the whole shebang in jeopardy. The BCS, when it first came in, it was very well received, and people thought it was great. But a couple of years into it, teams got in that maybe didn't deserve to get in. And so what we did is began to change the formula so we'd get the right teams in. And that over time led to the public not quite trusting it as much as we would have wanted them to. Now, the changes we made were good, and they helped it, and it's better now than it was. But looking back, I'm not sure we did the right thing by making all the changes in the selection process. And as you know, and Joe touched on this a little bit, but the BCS has been very good to Oklahoma football. And I will say that the Boise State game was not my fault. Okay? But OU's had benefited in a great deal from the BCS, and it's just because of the way things would fall out at the end of the year. But I think we Sooners need to really look back and think that the BCS was good for us. Every 4 years, it was time to renew the agreement for the BCS, and all the conferences came to the table, and they discussed what to do about it. Well, that led the media every 4 years to think, we got to change this. They might change it this time. And there might be a playoff, a big playoff. And so every 4 years we were subject to a great deal of apprehension. I'll tell you one thing, in our world, in my world, there's no shortage of passion and no shortage of people with strong opinions. I don't know why I thought of this, but we had some people at OU with strong opinions. I'll never forget the night in 1991. Some of you may have been there. I was at the official table when we were playing Missouri in basketball. And there was a couple of bad calls, and the fans got up in arms and threw some things on the court. And I don't remember whether Jerry Weber was doing the scorebook, Mike Treps was doing the PA. Anyway, Coach Tubbs came walking down to the table, and I'm sitting right there. And I'm thinking, game's going on. What is Billy doing coming down to the table? The crowd was in an uproar. Norm Stewart was storming around, and Mike Treps gave the microphone to Billy. And I mean, this is in slow motion in my brain. And I thought, I don't think they ought to give the microphone to Billy. And then Billy started off. He got the microphone. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please do not throw things on the floor." And I thought, wow, Billy is kind of being sane about this. Then he went into part B, clause B of that, which was, no matter how bad the officiating is, don't throw things on the floor. And that's when Ed Hightower went. That's 1 T, that's 2 T's, Billy, and you are gone. That was a great deal. You know, looking back, just another moment about basketball. I was also at the table in about 1972 at the old field house when we were in a great fiery game with Joe Cipriano from Nebraska. And at the time, they used an actual starter's pistol to signify the end of the half and the end of the game. And the guy on the scorebook picked up the pistol and would actually literally fire it into the air. And so we're in this amazing game with Nebraska, and I look up, and there comes from my left Joe Cipriano walking to the table. It was weird that I got to be there for both of those, 20 years apart. Joe comes over, and the next thing I remember hearing is the sound of a gunshot because it's like 8 minutes left in the game. And Joe has picked up the starter's pistol from the table and fired it up into the air. And I don't remember if they ran him out. Joe signed as a manager for that team. Did he get run? I can't remember. They sat Joe down. Anyway, some great characters. But 2 years ago, we began to consider what to do at the end of the fourth 4-year BCS cycle. And the fans, of course, were really wanting more football and wanting a bracket. And we got that. And so we heard those. We heard the fans. On the other side was our desire to keep the regular season and keep the bowl experience for as many athletes as possible. And so people said, you got to have 18 playoff, you got to have 16-team playoff. Well, we knew that we would jeopardize number 1 and number 2. So our group, after many, many hours of discussion, came up with the college football playoff, or with the 14 playoff, which later got named the college football playoff. And the 14 playoff starts next year, and it will be a good thing for the sport. I will say this, I hope the college football playoff, I can only hope that it will do as much for the game as the BCS has done. I got a little PowerPoint. I want to just slide through it here so that will tell you a little bit more about the playoff, and then we can stop and have questions. We had a grand ceremony to announce the name College Football Playoff. And one of my sports writing friends in Texas tweeted about the name. He said if Bill Hancock had a dog, its name would be Dog. Oh my. Anyway, you can see the playoff starts next year. Real simple format. 4 best teams, semifinals, and a champ game. And it really is the biggest innovation in college football in many, many years. Every game will continue to count in the playoff. We will have the best 4 teams. They will be selected by a selection committee. I'll stop and talk about the selection committee just for a little bit. We're blowing up the computers. The computers are gone. The selection committee, however, will have whatever data that it wants in front of it. If it chooses to use computers, if it chooses to use the rankings of the best defenses in the country, if it chooses to use turnover margin, it can use whatever it wants to. But we will not have an official ranking computer system. We will have a committee of 12 to 18. I think it'll be on the low end of that. We have retired coaches can be a part of it, retired journalists. I think we will have a retired media person or maybe two. Former administrators. Current media will not be eligible to participate. And that's because, if you think of it, if a commentator were on the committee, every word that commentator said would be dissected 100 ways. And we just don't want to put anybody in that position. And plus, me as an old sports writer, as an old journalist, if any editor would want their person to be on this committee, then I don't think the editor's worth the salt, because I don't think an editor wants any of his people involved in making news. We have some basic criteria. If you can see that up there, it's pretty simple. The whole body of work: who'd they play, how'd you do, and did you win your championship? There's no limit to the number of teams from a conference that can be in the playoff. They could all four be teams from Big 12. Now, as it's played out, we played out the scenarios for the first 15 years of the BCS in great detail, and there was never a year when 4 teams would have been in. Actually, we never had a year when 3 teams from a conference would have been in the playoff. So I think this will be good. But we're going for just for the best 4 teams, and it does give us all the best of both worlds. It gives us a bracket, gives fans more football, which they desperately want, and yet it protects the regular season and the academic calendar. I wish you could have been there as we did the research. It was actually, now it's been 18 months ago to get ready to put this together. Among the things we checked was finals schedules. We did not want a big play. If we had a big playoff, we couldn't start it before the end of finals. And what we learned is, of the 125 institutions in our division, somebody had finals all the way up till December 21. So we really couldn't start the playoff until after Christmas. And with an 18 playoff, of course, you have 3 weeks, and with 16, it would be 4. So it was actually going to be very difficult to fit the playoff into the academic calendar. And as I talk to folks about this, most of them get glassy-eyed when I talk to them about the academic calendar. But believe me, we are desperate. We are not desperate. We are convinced that college football is successful only because it's an element of higher education. And if we move away from that, we've lost the core. And a lot of people don't care about that, fans, but I can promise you that we care. We who have this day-to-day responsibility. How about me for lucky? I get to live, eat, and breathe college football 24/7. I'm just very, very lucky. Anyway, please don't forget the role of athletics as a part of higher education. Not as some AAA for the pros, but as a part of higher education. People like Bob Stoops, I can go down and name dozens, 100 coaches who feel the same way that I do about that. A cool thing about this is it's going to take back New Year's for college football. Not that we ever really lost it, but we're going to have back-to-back triple headers, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, starting next year. That will be the 6 games that are going to host the playoff games, and 3 of them are going to be New Year's Eve and 3 of them are New Year's Day. So I think this will absolutely change the paradigm for New Year's Eve in this country. When we go to our New Year's Eve parties, they better have a TV so we can be watching college football. Then we have claimed we put the flag in the ground on Monday night. The first Monday night, generally after Monday Night Football goes off, will be college football championship game night. So the first year, the semifinal, I've got a little calendar on it, I'll save that. So we're going to know, we're not going to be moving from Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday every year. We're going to be planted on Monday night. So the Monday night of January will be college football playoff night, championship game night. The access, every team will have the same access. There's no automatic qualification. There is more revenue in this for everyone. Our ESPN contract precludes my giving revenue numbers, but you've seen them reported in the paper, and they're true. The revenue for everybody will go up from 2 to 3 times. And our revenue goes directly to the conferences, and then they distribute it among their schools. We have some more work to do. We got to finish the committee, and then we have to find some locations for the next few championship games. We did, as you may have read, we did select the Jerry World Stadium let me say it correctly, AT&T Stadium in Dallas as the host of the first championship game. I don't know how many have been there, but I didn't go there for a long time. And people told me how awesome it was. And I had not been there. And I went to see Nebraska and OU play in that Big 12 championship game. First time I was there. Thinking, okay, this is a nice stadium, but it can't be as good as they all say. Well, it wasn't as good as they all said. It was better. I can't believe it. And my part of my life is stadiums. I love stadiums. I've been to most of them around the country. And I'm also marvel at the shelf life of stadiums is so short in this country. And in 20 years, there'll be somebody to top Cowboy Stadium. Somehow, I'm not sure how they can do it, frankly, because it's so awesome. But somebody will top it eventually, I'm sure. Talked about the conferences managing the event. There's 10 conferences. They're all at the table. They created an entity, CFP Administration. I get to be the president of that, which again is a terrific honor. And we will manage the new championship game. You know, in the BCS, the championship game happens at a bowl site. The bowl actually manages it, but in this new day, we will manage it. Site selection, we will pick the next 2 cities this fall. There's considerable interest among the cities, as you can imagine, to be the host of this. Joe said this, and I don't know why the cities reminded me of it, but I rode my bicycle across the country a few years ago, and I wrote a book about it. And the book, well, Harry Potter has nothing to fear from my book sales, I will tell you that. But I went from stadium to stadium across the country, and I saw the Dome Stadium in Springerville, Arizona. I went to the little stadium in Hobart where my dad took me to high school and American Legion games. We went to the Clinton Library in Hope. We went to the stadium in Auburn, and I spent the night in Auburn, and I got to go see those lovely trees there at Toomer's Corner. And I wrote about how much I had enjoyed Auburn. Also wrote about the racism that I encountered in the South. And about 4 or 5 months after the book came out, I got a call from a guy, and he said, "This is Joe Smith in Tuscaloosa, Alabama." Tuscaloosa, keep that in mind. And he said, you the guy that wrote the book? Well, he had gone through the Kansas City phone book and gone through 4 Bill Hancocks before he got to me. So these other 3 guys had said, no, I'm not, I didn't write no book. But he said, "Are you the guy that wrote the book?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I wrote a book." And he said, "I got a bone to pick with you." And I'd been concerned that people would be calling me about writing about the racism that I encountered in Alabama and I thought, in Mississippi. And I thought, okay, this is it. Real nasty guy. I got a bone to pick with you. And so I thought, okay, I'm getting ready. He's going to say I'm some carpetbagging Yankee who come down here to stir things up. And I said, "Okay, sir, well, what is it?" Remember, Joe Blow from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He goes, "Why in the world did you spend the night at Auburn?" And it would have been funny, except he was dead serious about it. But when I went to Auburn and they brought the eagle out, and it was, I'll tell you, that eagle was scary. It wasn't as scary as Jack Whitaker was, but it was pretty scary. But I got to hold the eagle on my arm. Another little book story. While I'm on the book, I just have to say I did some book signings, one of which was up at the great bookstore in the north part of Oklahoma City. Now I've lost the name of it. Full Circle. Oh my goodness, what an attribute for Oklahoma City and for this area that bookstore is. If you haven't been there, please go. It's awesome. Anyway, a lady came up and she stood in line for a long. It's still there? Please tell me it's still there. Okay. A lady came up. She stood in line for a long time. She got to the front and she said, "Bill, do you know me?" And I looked at her, and she was stooped over and kind of squinting. And I said, "No, ma'am, I'm sorry, I don't." And it was my senior English teacher from Hobart High School. And I was so glad to see her, but she said, "Bill, I never thought you'd amount to anything." Oh, man, when she was our teacher, she was, back in Hobart, she was old and frumpy and out of touch with reality and just doddering, we thought. And I asked her how old she was at the book signing. She told me, and I calculated. And when we had her in high school, she was 48 years old. Oh, my. Anyway, just a little bit about our structure. We are governed by a group of presidents, one from every conference. That's the board of managers. And then the management committee is a group of commissioners, again from every conference, who are on the next level down to them, and they really handle the global day-to-day aspects. And then we have a staff. Our office is in Las Colinas in Dallas. Never thought I'd become a Texan, but I love it there. We have a beautiful office, and we have a terrific staff of people, as you can imagine, who are very honored to be a part of this. We have on our staff, every conference is represented. We have a sprinter from Penn State. We have actually two of us that went to OU. That was by accident. Let's see, we have a Virginia, we have two from Wake Forest, one from Arizona. So I'm really proud of the diversity in our staff. 10 are on board. We have 5 men and 5 women. So I'm delighted with the staff we have assembled. Here's how the bracket's going to look this first year. Semifinals at the Sugar Bowl and at the Rose Bowl. And then the championship game, of course, the next Monday. You can see there's 11 days in between. I think that's going to be a good thing for us. Teams are going to have a little chance to heal up. As the calendar falls, there won't be that much time every year, however. There's a little blurb about the back-to-back triple headers. Here's the way the rotation will work. There are 6 bowls that will host the semifinals. So each bowl will host semifinals once every 3 years. The first year, as I said, we've determined that Rose and Sugar will host. The next year it will be Cotton and Orange. And the next year it will be Fiesta and the bowl in Atlanta, which is to be named. That one has been the Chick-fil-A Bowl, and we have asked them to give it a commercial moniker, but also a moniker like Orange or Fiesta or Sugar. And of course, for years theirs was Peach, and they may go to Chick-fil-A Peach, but they haven't determined that yet. We don't really care what moniker they choose, but we have asked them to make sure that they have some kind of a geographical moniker. When the games are not hosting the semifinals, then they will host teams that will be given to them by the selection committee. There's no more guys in red blazers going to the press box and choosing teams for these games. We will be giving them their teams. And the Bowls are happy about this. They are glad there's a playoff. They're glad they're in it. I will say this. We gave serious consideration to having the semifinals on campus. And it was a very close call, but the athletic directors that we work with, Joe Castiglione is one of them. And Joe, by the way, is fabulous. I'm sure you know that. Joe said, and Joe and the others, the guy from Wisconsin was there, a guy from Florida, they said, I'm not real sure we want to have semifinal games on campus. It would be a tremendous home field advantage. Of course, we went away from that in the tournament. You can't play on your home court in the tournament, in the basketball tournament. I think it's been a good thing for us. Campuses are closed. Staff that does the ticket taking and runs things in many cases during the holidays are gone. And somebody did say we really don't want to play in 8 below weather in Madison, Wisconsin on December 31st. So we came back to placing the semifinals in the bowl games for the good of the bowls as well as for the good of the system. Here are the future championship games dates. This is kind of in the weeds, but you might be interested. If you look in some of the years, well, the earliest is January 7th in 2019. So in that year, our semifinal games will be on December 31st and the championship game January 7th. So the teams, the universities, everybody's not going to have much turnaround time in those years in getting ready to go back to the championship game. One of the unknowns that people talk about in this is, will fans go to the semifinals and then will they crank back up and go the next week to the championship game? We think they will. We think we also are going to have lots of local support for the semifinal games, but it's something that time's just going to have to tell. We're going to have a deeply discounted price for students. We're also going to have a discounted price for the team's tickets for our games. So I think we're not going to have any trouble in this regard. But if you can imagine, think about this. If you were an OU fan, would you go to Pasadena for the semifinals? And then if you win, then you don't know you're going to win, of course, unless you're an OU fan. You always know you're going to win. But would you go then the next week, buy an airline ticket to go to Miami for the championship game, say? That's something we've got to figure out. But we think fans will go. Some team from Louisiana. Yeah. 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 Let me talk about tickets. It's a fascinating topic. In the BCS, every school had to buy 17,500 tickets. And that's what OU got for that championship game. And LSU got 17,500 tickets. Of course, they had another 50,000 who could walk to the Superdome practically. And that will continue in the playoff day because we don't want to burden the school with having to buy. Hey, Bruce, how are you? Just saw you out there. Bruce Campbell from Enid, Oklahoma. We don't want to burden the school with having to buy a lot of tickets. If you remember when OU played, did OU play Connecticut? My brain's fading. If you remember that game, Connecticut bought about 3,000 of their tickets, and they ate then about 14,000. And it was not the right thing. And we're trying to come up with a ticket allocation that will satisfy Texas when they play in Dallas, as well as Connecticut when they play in Phoenix. And it obviously is almost an impossible situation. But long story short, we are going to hold a bunch of tickets for the teams. And bowl season, there are people who bought tickets for bowl games forever. You're right, Howard. But they don't get their seats for this. We have moved them out of mid-court, and we're going mid-court. Can you tell I'm a basketball guy? And we plopped the school people down there. This is another quick story. I wanted to diverge. But when I was at the Big 8, we did a seating reallocation for the Big 8 tournament at Kemper Arena. And it was very controversial. Everybody in the world was mad at us about it. Every school was mad. And I got a call from a guy who was an OU fan, and he didn't know I'd gone to OU. And he said, listen, you guys hate OU up there at the Big 8 office. And I said, how come? He said, well, you don't give us any good tickets for that tournament. And I said, well, here, everybody gets the same. And he was not hearing it. He would not listen. And I'm really calm. I don't get upset. There's other things in life maybe people get upset about, but not me. But I sort of almost got angry, and I said, hey, wait a minute, buddy. And I didn't say buddy. Don't do that. But I said, I want you to know I went to the University of Oklahoma. I was editor of the student newspaper. I know Joe Foote. And the guy said, I'm ashamed to have you as a fellow alumnus of this university.
I remember that phone call.
I didn't talk to Howard for like 6 years after that. Anyway, tickets are an issue, and the people from the schools are going to have great tickets for this. We're bumping a bunch of people. If you're a Cotton Bowl season ticket holder, chances are you're not going to have your same seat. You're going to have a seat, perhaps, but chances are you're not going to have the same one. Anyway, that's a little bit about the dates. Fascinating. Obviously, one year the game's January 13th. It was fun to sit down and put all this together. I loved it. It was just an amazing thing. And as I was doing it, I thought, I can't believe, Bill, that you are getting to do this for the college football playoff. And you're just a dumb, regular guy from Hobart, Oklahoma, and you're getting to do this for this college football playoff. Selection committee, composition is to be determined. As I said, I will tell you that I've been making calls over the last month or 6 weeks to prospective members. I haven't called you yet, Howard, so hang in there. Yeah. And it's been phenomenal. The reception has just been phenomenal from people. Everyone has said, I'll be honored to be a part of this. They're delighted with it. There have been a lot of jokes about this, that the committee members are going to have to enter the witness protection program. And we know team number 5 is not going to like us very much. But the people that I'm calling are top-of-the-line football people. The other day I had 2 Heisman Trophy winners that called me back in the same day, Heisman Trophy winners from our era, that is, and they were both thrilled that they had been asked to be considered to be on this committee. Anyway, that's who they are. A little bit about them. Here's some of the general criteria for selection we talked on a minute ago. I won't spend a lot of time with that. It will be a very time-consuming responsibility for these committee members. When you see their names come out in the press, you will know that they have all committed to spend a lot of time working on this endeavor. Some of the things they will do, they will select the top 4 teams, and they will seed them just like basketball. and they will assign them to the semifinal sites. Howard, I'm glad you brought up about LSU because this is something I think people will find interesting. We will try not to put number 1 and 2 at a home crowd disadvantage. It's kind of a double negative. But we won't, for example, if Ohio State is number 1, I don't want to keep using OU as an example because it's not a good thing for me to do. But if Ohio State is number 1 and LSU is number 4, it's most likely that and the semifinals that year are in New Orleans and Pasadena. It's most likely that that game will be played in Pasadena. So as not to put Ohio State in front of those, how many did you say, 974,000 LSU fans? So as not to do that. Now, the other side of that coin, of course, is LSU people are going to have to fly over to Pasadena. But we think Ohio State or OU or whoever it is, number 1, has earned the right not to have to play in front of that kind of a hostile crowd. There may be years when we won't be able to do it, but that will be part of the selection committee's responsibility. Then they will assign the teams to the other games. The other of those 6 bowls that I talked about, 3 of them are filled with contracts. Sugar, Rose, and Orange have all made contracts, so both of their sides will be filled. But the other games, Cotton, Fiesta, and Atlanta, they will have openings, and the committee will tell them who their teams are, and they will tell them based on the rankings. So if the top 7 are in the playoff or in their contracted bowls, and team number 8, we will assign that team to play in Atlanta. And as I said, no more bowl selection committees, at least not at the top end of the bowl system. We also have guaranteed a spot in this for the highest ranked champion from what used to be known as the non-AQ conferences. Some media mistakenly talked about them as non-BCS conferences. Conference USA, the MAC, Mountain West, Sun Belt, and who did I leave out? I know I'd leave somebody out if I tried this. Conference USA, thank you. Their champion, their highest ranked champion, has a guaranteed spot in one of the 6 bowl games. Not in the playoff. They'll be in the playoff if they're in the top 4, but if they're not, then they will have a spot in one of the other 6 games. So the committee will select who that team is and assign them to their game. If you are the Big 12 champion and you're not in the playoff and the Sugar Bowl is hosting the playoff, then you will have a spot in one of the other games. Big 12 and SEC, of course, will be playing by contract in the Sugar Bowl, except when the Sugar Bowl has semifinals. So those teams don't get to go. But they are guaranteed a spot in one of the other top-tier games, one of our other games, if they get bumped out of their contract bowl. I think it'll take a while for the media to grasp that. I can tell by the nods that you have already grasped it in this room. Howard, you get that? Thank you, Howard. Yeah. We're going to try for competitive matchups in those games. We're going to try not to rematch people who played in the regular season. This is all kind of nerdy, but this is what I'm getting to work with and what I've been getting to think about over the last 12 months. Just about to the end of this, geography will be a consideration. So if it's OU and they're not in the playoff game and there's a Cotton Bowl slot available, then we will do our best to plug them into the Cotton Bowl. What I said about protecting 1 and 2 applies only to the semifinal games. But if a Cotton Bowl doesn't have semifinals and there's a slot available, then we're going to try to send a team from this area down there to play. Likewise, Fiesta, likewise, Sugar, and also Miami. If we can do it, we'll try to do it. Very proud of the BCS, as I said before. The game has grown nationally. I'm hurtling toward the end of this, so hang with me just for a second. There's the number about how many times number 1 and 2 met in a bowl game before the BCS. It's really been phenomenal, the benefits that the BCS has brought to the game. And college football's thriving. Attendance is up so much. The championship games draw a tremendous audience. Way more viewers than Final Four, NBA Finals, or World Series watch the college football playoff game every year. It's just a sign of how popular this game is, and furthermore, how lucky all of us are who get to work in it. Yeah, I'm really proud of the BCS, and it is the last season. People say to me all the time, well, Bill, wait a minute. You were the defender of the BCS. You were the designated javelin catcher on the BCS, and now you're going to switch right over and manage this playoff. And my response to that always is the same. we listen to fans. Fans they want a bracket, they wanted more football. We had our principles to maintain, which was protect the regular season and protect the bowls and protect the academic calendar. And we think the 4-team tournament that we put together meets those objectives. It absolutely is a win-win. And there, if you want it, is how to say hi to me. I'll be happy to talk to any of you anytime about any of this. Does anyone have any questions? Can anyone spell lavalier? No volunteers. I can't spell lavalier. Any questions? Complaints? I'm ready. Yes, David. Strength of schedule will be an important element in the selection committee process. And I'll tell you, the first year that Team 5 gets left out because they didn't play as good a schedule as Team 4, Team 5 will upgrade its schedule immediately. If you remember what happened the one year that OU made it in and Auburn got left out, Auburn's non-conference schedule didn't match up. And so this is a dilemma for athletic directors because schedules are done for a couple of years. Now, they don't schedule out as far as they used to. When I was here at OU 40 years ago, we had our schedules done 7, 8 years out. But they don't do that anymore. So you will see better intersectional games in the new day. They won't all be Oklahoma-Notre Dame caliber, but you will see better schedules. Now, there was a part B to that. David and I already forgot what it was. Oh, yes. Good. Good question. Yeah, the question was, will we release interim rankings during the season? The BCS standings announcements, which start mid-October, have been a great thing for the regular season. And we don't want to give that up. We want to keep that. On the other hand, the selection committee has to get together in person to do these rankings. And we don't believe it will be fair to have them come every week starting at mid-season. So we still have work to do on this, but I suspect they will have 4 interim rankings before the final ranking, 3 to 5 interim rankings. So yes, there will be interim rankings. The benefit of that, of course, is to the regular season, so you can pull for who you want to win and who you want to not win, as well as managing expectations. We want people to know where their teams are situated. So yeah, there will be interims. Other questions? Howard.
What about conferences? How is that going to be affected?
You know, that's a very good question also. I get this a lot. People say you must make every conference have a conference playoff game. Well, we can't do that. That's how the conferences decide their representative to the BCS is up to them. And the Big 12, and you've read about this, there's some coaches in the Big 12 who do not want a championship game. And so the Big 12 decided not to do it. And that's fine with us. We don't care. However conferences want to do it. So obviously the Big 12 will continue to play games, regular season games, on that weekend of conference championships. And while the others are having their conference championship games. And you know, and they know what the jeopardy what jeopardy those conference championship games create for them. Obviously, number one, could lose out on the chance to be in the playoff. But they think that's a small price to pay for the ability to have that celebration of the championship game. Identical records will be interesting. Who did you play? Where did you play them? The committee will know that the left tackle maybe had a stomach ache and played, but he wasn't up to snuff in the game that they lost. They will know that the backup quarterback had to play 2 quarters for whatever reason. They'll know everything about every loss, and they will differentiate between those teams that have 2 losses. We had it a little bit this way in basketball, but the difference is basketball has more data points with 30 games to compare. In football, we only have 12 or 13 for the ones that have a playoff. So there's not as many data points. I think football will be more difficult than it was for us in basketball. And of course, we're selecting only 4 in football. But we'll get it done. It'll be cool. Yes. Margin, this is a smart guy right here. This is a very good question. margin of victory will I I'm not sure. I can't answer that. That's a hard one to answer. Margin of victory does not come into play in the BCS. We have told the computers not to include margin of victory because we don't need anybody beating anybody 73-0, just so they can do better in the rankings. Unless it's who? OU in Texas. Yeah, I get that. People, by the way, Texas, so OU Texas. I was not allowed to go to OU Texas when I was a child. We were big OU fans, but my parents didn't let me go. And it was because they wanted to withhold this treat from me. So when I got to be a freshman here at OU, I rode the train down and took a taxi from the train station in downtown Dallas over to Fair Park, and it was an awesome experience. They beat us 41-9, but it didn't matter because I finally got to go to OU Texas, and I learned from that, you know, you can withhold some things from your children, and it might help them down the road. Anyway, gosh, I segued into parenthood. We get blamed for everything in the BCS. We get blamed for global warming. But margin of victory, I don't think will be a factor. I hope it's not. It's hard. It is human nature to look at how well teams do. But all of the folks that know this game tell us that beyond about 4 touchdowns, it doesn't matter. And because anybody could be, well, 2 teams played today, and I know that the team A could have won 73-0 if it wanted to, but it didn't want to. This is another interesting factor. As an old OU guy, when people say to me, "You're responsible for running up the score," remember when somebody beat Indiana 80-0 or something a couple years ago, and they were blaming us? Well, do they remember when Bud Wilkinson played Kansas State back in the 50s, and those scores were 66-0? And that was way before the BCS got created. And the 222-0 Georgia Tech over Cumberland, that was not our fault back in 1924. We also have some, I'll say one more thing about that. Interestingly, people ask me about conference realignment and the extent to which the BCS has been responsible for conference realignment. And the fact is, not to a great extent. Because if you think of the teams that have moved, maybe Boise State moved to the Big East because they wanted to enhance their BCS opportunity. Because at the time, of course, the Big East had an automatic berth. But the others, Texas A&M did not move to the SEC because of the BCS. Colorado didn't leave the Big 12 because of the BCS. So we had very little to do with that. And something else in that regard is conferences, schools have been changing conferences forever. I found a clipping from the Daily Oklahoman from 1927, I think it was, and OU left Oklahoma A&M behind. They left the Missouri Valley, which both OU and A&M were in, Oklahoma State A&M at the time were in. OU left them and formed the Big Six, along with Iowa State, Nebraska, Kansas State, and Missouri. And the headline was, Sooners leave Aggies behind. And it was like, end of world coming. 1927. The world didn't end. So, and I'm an old-fashioned. I'm disappointed, just like you are, with the fact that Texas and Texas A&M are not going to play. It's an unbelievable, almost nightmare scenario. Kansas, Missouri, Penn State, Pitt went away many years ago. But things change in college athletics, and the only thing constant is change. Yes. I think it will put more pressure on from a perspective of folks who think they should be paid. I think because they are college students and because we are a part of higher education, that personally I do not believe they should be paid. I do think there's a way to provide more than they're getting now in terms of the full cost of education. But as someone who put 2 boys through college, listen, y'all know the value of that scholarship, the lodging, the travel, the medical care, the food, the experiences they get is almost incalculable. So I don't line up with those people who think they should be paid. You can't see, but Jim just did like this. Yeah, Andy. Yeah, the Super Bowl is obviously the gorilla in this, and it's a fabulous event. They will not be threatened by us, and we will not be threatened by them. Um, our taking Monday night is a great thing for college fans in this country. You don't have to. Those of us who love the NFL, now we got a college game on Monday night to watch. So I don't see any effect between the two necessarily. We intend this to be a version of the Super Bowl. However, we do not intend it to be exactly the same. We will keep it in the context of higher education. And the Super Bowl, of course, they don't have to worry about that. We're not going to have the mega parties like they do. But we will have a grand event to celebrate college football. That's something that's been missing in the BCS, I think, is a weekend of celebration about the game, a fan festival. I would love to have a concert of the glee clubs from the four institutions in the Dallas, what's that beautiful concert all downtown? Yeah, I'd love to have that. I'm a music jock. I came to OU actually thinking I was going to be a piano major, and I discovered real fast that I didn't have the single-mindedness nor the talent to do it, like a linebacker who might come be good in Hobart High School but couldn't play for the Sooners. So I found my way over to the back shop at the Oklahoma Daily. And yet another part B of that, and I forgot. It will figure right in there, and they will say, if we make it to the semifinals, here are the two sites. Do you want us to hold a ticket for you? Here are the prices. We'll know the prices. And then, as far as if they don't make the semifinals, getting into one of our other games, that will be treated. They'll treat that the same as they will other bowl games, because they will know where the other possibilities are, where OU might go. So they'll just add that to that sheet. And then they will say, if we do get in the semifinals and if we win, then would you go to the championship game? And here are the prices for that. Other questions? Well, some people have to die first. I did. I love history, and I think it's so important that we write down the history. And I wrote a little history. Bill's talking about. I wrote a history of Hobart, and only about 400 people in Hobart care about it, but they love it. But we gotta write it down. And I was asked actually to write a book about the creation of the Big 12 Conference, and because that was not an easy thing, and I haven't had time to do it, but somebody needs to do it before some people do die. And we have notes, we have a great archive about what happened in creating the playoff. And in another 40 years, I'll try to write a book about it. Maybe. Other questions, comments, complaints? Well, thank you very much. I've had a blast today. This has been great. And I guess, did I have to leave? Can we stay here and talk? Did Joe leave?